What is up, everybody? Chad Ferguson here, Catfish Edge. So I'm down here doing a little work on the Sea Arc Pro Cat 240, doing a bunch of rigging and everything. All of my fall and winter fishing prep, just kind of getting ready. I take a little bit of time this time of year just to kind of regroup, re-spool all my rods, do repairs, get all my rigs and everything ready, because once the colder weather hits, I run hard for a long time again, and I want to make sure that everything is in tip-top shape when I'm fishing for those big trophy blue catfish and shallow water blue catfish in the fall and winter as well. So I'm going to go over today my top rigs for catching fall and winter catfish, answer all of your questions. So during the cold water period or cool water period, depending on how the weather is, fall and winter, I rely on a number of different techniques. I do a lot of fishing moving, so either drifting with the wind, dragging baits with the trolling motor, pulling planer boards, suspend drifting, lots of different variations of fishing while the boat is moving. But there are also times where I have to pivot and fish on anchor. So I've kind of tweaked my rigs over the years to specifically tailor to being able to fish all those different techniques without having to stop and re-rig all of my rods. So I'm going to show you here how I do that. So my go-to rig is Santee rig. You know, I use 30-pound Whisker Seeker main line here for most of these rods. I do run braid on a few. Use the Whisker Seeker sinker slide with the bead below it there to protect that knot, and a swivel. And then down below that, I've got my rig. So this sinker is going to slide on the bottom, and this rig with the float on it here is going to lift that bait up, get it out of that mud and sediment, and get it into that strike zone for the catfish. So the way that I rig this, I'm using the 60-pound Whisker Seeker leader line here, and I run a length of line here to a ball chain swivel. And that ball chain swivel does a couple things. First of all, I put a bead and a Versa rattle up above that ball chain swivel there, and that keeps that rattle up away from my rig. And then it also, that ball chain swivel really helps with preventing line twist, and it gives a whole lot more action to the bait. Really allows that leader and bait to move around in the water, and I think it helps with catching fish. It really helps with the line twist. And then on the bottom side of that ball chain swivel, I put a little short length of that 60-pound Whisker Seeker leader line again, and then tie that to the Whisker Seeker catfish rig. Now this is the XL Rattler. During the fall and winter, I'll use the XL Rattlers here. Those are a little bit smaller float. The Big Bertha. This is a big float for floating big baits. And then the Black Mamba. And this is basically the same float as the Big Bertha, but the Black Mamba has two hooks on it. So the reason I use these Whisker Seeker rigs like this, or these floats, are twofold. One, these are made out of EVA foam. These are real tough. So when you're fishing for big catfish, you've got these floats on these Santee rigs. A lot of times what happens when the fish bite them, they'll go over the hook and their mouth will go around that float. If you fish with those styrofoam floats, a lot of times you'll pull it up and the float will be gone, or it'll be all smashed, and you have to kind of tear it off from those fish hitting that float and mouthing down on that float before the hook actually, you know, gets tension on it, slides and hooks in their mouth. So these EVA Whisker Seeker floats are a lot more durable, and another reason that I use them is because they're easy and quick for me to rig up. I keep a bunch of these rigged up, ready to go in the little rig wrap rig containers. But what this does with these speed clips here, I've got a little bitty small hook on here because I was doing some playing this morning and I had some really small baits on here. But most of the time in the fall and winter, I'm fishing with bigger baits. So I'm using that 8/0 or 10/0 triple threat. A lot of times I'm having to adjust hooks. I may start with a 10, downsize to an 8. Sometimes I have to downsize to a 6. It just kind of depends on what the fish are doing, what's biting, what I'm fishing for. And these speed clips on these Whisker Seeker rigs here are quick and easy for you to just pop these hooks off and change hooks. So when I have to make those adjustments and go from an 8/0 to a 10/0 or a 10/0 down to an 8/0, I can just do that real quick by popping that hook off of that speed clip and putting a new hook on. I don't have to tie a whole new rig. Now, I do spend, again, a lot of time drifting and fishing, you know, mobile with the boat moving, but there are times, fall and winter, where I have to pivot and fish on anchor. So I use different variations of these dragging sinkers. I've got a handful of these that somebody, I think somebody gave them to me. I don't remember. I've had them for a while. I make my own as well. I'll do some videos on different dragging sinker options. There's a bunch of different ones that I use and they all work. I'll do a video on that in the future. But the reason that I use these Whisker Seeker sinker slides like this is if I go out and I'm drifting and then I decide that you know, I want to pivot, maybe I need to go up shallow, fish on anchor, maybe I need to fish on anchor in deeper water, I can just pop that dragging sinker off and put one of these little flat coin sinkers on here and going the wrong way, trying to do that looking in the camera. Just put one of those flat coin sinkers on there and bam, I'm ready to anchor up and fish. I don't have to cut a bunch of lines, tie new rigs, everything else. It's a quick, simple adjustment. I can fish with either a flat coin sinker like this if I'm going to fish on anchor, or some sort of variation of drifting sinker. There you go. I can't tell if that's on the camera all the way or not, the glare on the screen. So that's it. It's a pretty simple rig, you know, just kind of a variation of a Santee rig, but I am a firm believer, like I said, after a lot of years of doing this and a lot of trial and error, this is my go-to. Using that sinker slide, I keep that Versa-Rattle on there. I love the chrome Versa-Rattle. That is my go-to color, and I run a Versa-Rattle on every rig. And then again, that ball chain swivel there, running down to one of these Whisker Seeker floats. One thing I forgot to cover is length. So generally what I'll do is I keep 3 or 4 rods rigged up with a 24-inch length from the swivel to the hook, and then I keep the rest of the rods rigged up with about 36-inch length from the swivel to the hook. And what that does, because that has the float on there, your weight is going to be on the bottom, the float is going to help lift that up. So the longer that leader is, the further that you know, bait is going to come up in the water column. So I generally will rig a handful up that are 24 inches and then the rest of them 36 inches long. And when I start fishing, I put a few of each out, kind of see what the fish want. I'm also washing my graph at that time, looking to see how far those fish are up off the bottom and where they're holding. And sometimes I need to make adjustments and go further than 36 inches off. but not often. And there's a couple other ways to get to those fish as well if they're suspended up higher. But I put some 24-inch out, I put some 36-inch out, and I let the fish tell me what they want. There are days that it doesn't matter. There's days that I catch fish on both rigs and it doesn't, make a difference. But there are days where I'll get out there and they seem to want that shorter rig, or they seem to want that longer rig. And when that happens, and I see that I'm only catching fish on a certain rig length, then I'll make adjustments so that's all I have in the water. And I've usually got enough on the boat that I can get 6 or 8 rods like that out in the water at any given time without having to do a bunch of rigging. Again, all about keeping those baits in the water as long as you possibly can. Anytime you have to pull them in, you want to be able to get them back in the water as quick as possible. So the other rig that I use, let me wrap this up real quick. It's a little trick for you. I did a video on this a long time ago, but if you take this fishing line and just wrap it around like this and then hook it on one of those eyes, you see how nice and taut that is? Keeps those rods from getting tangled up when you got a bunch of rods bunched up together. So the other is pretty simple rig, but I'm very specific in what I tie. And this is similar to that Santee rig that I just showed you. Get some line let out here. Kind of hard to work in this tight space and keep all this stuff on camera. So this is, again, 30-pound Whisker Seeker monofilament mainline. A lot of times for these rods that I'm rigging like this, I will use braid, 60 or 80-pound Whisker Seeker braid. I just haven't gotten around to putting braid on these rods yet, but I will soon. This is a 5-ounce no roll. Sometimes I'll go up as heavy as 6 or 7, or 5-ounce egg sinker. Sorry, not a no roll. I've got a bead down below it there, running to the swivel. And then here is 60-pound leader line again. I do not have a float on this. This is basically just a plain old slip sinker rig. But about halfway down the rig, I've got, again, that ball chain swivel in there and a Versa rattle. I must have been asleep or drinking or something when I rigged this one up, because I need to have a bead in between that rattle and that ball chain swivel, but I missed it on this one. I can see my other rod over here has it on there, but I did this all really late at night. And then this is a 10-aught triple threat hook here. Pretty simple. And what I use this for is suspend drifting. So rather than dragging the weight on the bottom, moving those baits along, with these rods, I will keep those baits up off the bottom. So I'll do that. Some people call them down rods. Sometimes I'll go out, I'll mark fish, and the opportunity presents itself where I just drop those baits down to the bottom and then bring them up a couple of feet, and I'll run with my trolling motor to get those baits in front of the fish. Sometimes, almost always, when I'm dragging baits, either with the wind or with the trolling motor, planer boards or not, I almost always have a suspend rig out or two. So basically what I would do is if I'm fishing off the back of the boat, pulling planer boards, and I've got 4 or 6 rods out off the back, those weights dragging on the bottom, those floats lifting those baits up off the sediment, or out of the sediment. And so basically, if I'm pulling planer boards off the back of the boat, I've got 4 or 6 rods out, that weight's on the bottom, that float is lifting that bait up out of the sediment, and I'm dragging those baits along. Then I'll come up to the front with a down rod with this plain old rig, no float on it, and a big heavy sinker. This is 5 ounces. I'm fishing in lakes or reservoirs. There's not any current. Vast majority of the time, it's pretty rare that we've got any measurable current in any of our lakes here in Texas or Oklahoma. But what I'm doing, wrap this up and get this out of my way. So what I'm doing is dropping those down to the bottom. When they hit the bottom, I'm bringing them up a couple of turns. I've also got several rods rigged up with a line counter reel so I can be real precise as to where I'm putting those baits in the water column. So that's where, you know, if I go out, I see those big catfish, they're laying on a ledge or they're on a hump or a point or something, and they're up off the bottom, you know, maybe in 45 foot, maybe 20 foot off the bottom. I've got those down rods so I can get those baits right in front of the fish. And when I'm dragging baits, either with the wind or with the trolling motor, I use those down rods on the front of the boat or on the side of the boat. That way I'm just got a little bit different presentation out there and covering the water in a little bit different way. And you would really be surprised at the number of fish that you catch with those down rods. It is a big success on my boat and produces a lot of fish for me. The other thing that does, so if I'm drifting with the wind, I got all my rods down one side of the boat, I'll put a couple of down rods on the back side. And if I'm pulling baits with planer boards on the back of the boat, I put a couple of down rods on the front. So one thing that does, having those down rods, in addition to just being effective to catching fish, is if you get off into a brush pile or a trot line or a timber patch or something else, and all of a sudden you snag both of those down rods and you're trying to get them free, end up breaking them off, getting them loose or whatever else, you can get those other 6 or 8 or 10 rods, however you're fishing, whether you're fishing with the wind or pulling with the trolling motor, you can get those rods up out of the water before you hit that snag and, you know, hang up and break off all of your rods in the boat or all your rigs. So it's a very effective for finding snags. So those are my fall and winter catfish rigs. Again, a lot of information. It seems complicated, but it's really not. That modified Santee rig with that ball chain swivel, and then just that plain old slip sinker rig with the ball chain swivel, and a few little tweaks really can make a big difference for not only putting fish in the boat, but being more productive and having those lines in the water longer versus spending a lot of time fighting your fishing rigs. So that's everything that you need to know about my fall and winter catfish rigs. Go down below, leave me a comment. Let me know what your go-to rig is for fishing in the fall and winter. And I'll be back next week. I'm hoping that we'll be back on the water with an on-the-water action video. Weather's changing here, and the fish are starting to move. It's not just crackerjack, excellent fishing yet, but it's starting to get good. Till next time, I'm Chad Ferguson, catfishedge.com.